As we roll along, it is my pleasure to bring in the president of Showtime Sports and Events, Stephen Espinoza, and welcome him back to the Big Fight Weekend podcast as we have a fascinating, I will use that word, fascinating split doubleheader pay-per-view. You got a Charlo here, you got a Charlo there, and we're looking forward to it this weekend from the Mohegan Sun Casino. First of all, Stephen, good to have you. Thank you for popping back on.
Absolutely. You can tell by the background. I'm here in Mohegan Sun, dutifully staying in my hotel room as COVID protocols require.
You do not have the mask at the moment, but he might have to have it a little bit later on if need be.
But the reality on this one, I am on the same floor as the fighters, and I can confirm there is literally a guard at their end of the hall to make sure that no one's wandering off and going for a walk around the casino or even go outside. You've got a hall monitor, full-time, 24 hours a day.
As we keep joking, welcome to 2020. Everything that we thought that we knew and knew how to do has been upside down. And at the time we're taping, you've just concluded the press conference where you spoke and you essentially said, these are challenging times and we had to be creative with what we're doing. Follow up on that. As the fighters met with the media and you got this week basically kicked off?
You know, it's a steep learning curve. As you probably heard from David Benavidez a few weeks ago, you know, his weight cut didn't go exactly the way he planned. And, you know, without making excuses, he sort of said, look, there were some things that went on fight week. You know, you don't have your normal range of options for cutting weight. You don't have, you know, a gym per se. There's a workout facility, but it's not a gym. You don't have a spa, and there's limitations on what you can do. So that word spread pretty quickly. I don't imagine that that's gonna happen, but it's sort of one of those things. Live and learn. You know, you're not gonna be able to go do road work in a plastic suit and cut weight. There are some things that are gonna be adjusted, not just one of many. I mean, sparring is an issue. Getting good sparring, guys traveling, there are different levels of comfort, you know, what are protocols, the fact that most boxing gyms aren't set up to do protocols. There are a range of challenges, nowhere near the challenges of everyday life, but, you know, it affects all facets of the sport as well.
No doubt about that. All right, so I want to begin at the beginning, how appropriate. When and how did you come up with the idea of the split pay-per-view that is going to have a little interlude, a little intermission in between, starts Saturday afternoon, Eastern time in the U.S., go all the way until Saturday late night with 6 different bouts, 5 of them world title bouts. How did this come about?
Well, I think it started with really the unification fight. You know, that is what everyone has wanted for a while, and we thought that it was maybe headed to something else. We thought that maybe it would be, J-Rock, Julian Williams, and Charlo, you know, in some kind of unification. Then Rosario comes out of nowhere, unifies, and then I think, you know, the natural fight, you know, whether people have been introduced to Rosario or not, you know, unification is always a big fight. So in pandemic, when we were brainstorming, we started there and sort of said, well, you know, it's a big fight. It's probably a little bit challenging to make that work on Showtime. What can we do to elevate it? You know, obviously, if we could get a big fight for Jamal, that would elevate it. The idea was originally to sort of piggyback off of WWE, because WWE with WrestleMania did a 2-night pay-per-view, you know, Saturday, Sunday. And so we thought, let's make it a 2-night pay-per-view, one price, Jamal on Friday, Jamel on Saturday, 2 different cards, 2 different nights of entertainment.
Interesting.
And the one advantage that WWE had is their pay-per-views, as you know, WWE fans know, are digital. Like there's all, you know, they're not being sold through traditional distributors for the most part. But what we quickly found out is that pay-per-view technology obviously dates back to the 80s and or maybe even late 70s. And it's not set up it's set up to do a 24-hour event. You know, whether it's a sporting event or a movie, they're 24-hour cycles. So it would have required reinventing the wheel to set up something that you pay for Friday evening and it's open for, for a full 48 hours. So then we said, okay, well, we'll make it one event and we'll call it a doubleheader, sort of like an NBA doubleheader or an MLB doubleheader. And we'll push back the start time a little bit earlier. And, hopefully people will realize, look, this is a great value for the money.
So you came up with the idea, and now you got to sell the idea, if you will, to fighters. And you even expressed in the press conference, and we're going to look a little bit at the clip here of the press conference that was on Wednesday afternoon. You openly said, hey, I credit these guys because they were willing to go along with this, the Charlos in particular, but all the fighters that are fighting on a championship fight card were willing to go along with this. That was a whole different challenge, wasn't it, to get them to go along with split pay-per-view on the same day?
It is, because the reality is everyone's got to take a little bit of a haircut because there's no gate revenue. And everyone's got to say, okay, let's be the first ones into the pool, so to speak, at least on the pay-per-view front. And sort of say, look, yeah, we've had some fights. We haven't had a fight of this magnitude under these conditions. So that adds an element of uncertainty, and fighters like certainty. They like to know what they're getting into and eliminate all the variables. This is a variable which no one had dealt with. And from doing weigh-ins and press conferences and an entire pay-per-view fight week, under these circumstances, that's part of it. But the part of it, no one said, let's wait a few months and see if we can get in front of a crowd, and make sure that, I can maximize the money here. The reality is, yeah, they're leaving some money on the table, but no one wanted to wait. They sort of said, look, let's get back to business and let's get things underway. You tell me what I have to do, what I have to test, and let's bring a big event to the fans.
And that's what they're doing on Showtime. You're hearing the voice of Stephen Espinoza. If you're only hearing us on the Big Fight Weekend podcast through Apple Podcasts, through Spotify, through Google Podcast, or however you found us, social media link, find the video on the Big Fight Weekend YouTube page, and you can see us moving pictures. You can see us talking, and Stephen is gracious to hop on the video with me in the build-up to the Charlo brothers headlining this doubleheader. Jermall Charlo taking on Sergey Derevyanchenko. That will headline the afternoon version, if you will, of the pay-per-view as the main event. And then Jermell Charlo, Jason Rosario, as Stephen was mentioning, for the unified junior middleweight 3 titles that will take place later in the evening. All of these at the Mohegan Sun Casino in Connecticut as part of a split pay-per-view on Showtime. So I wonder, there's been a lot of discussion about the price, and I'm going to put a smile on your face right now. I'm not beating you up about the price. Mm-hmm. I keep saying to people, did you expect this to be the price of a quarter pounder with cheese extra value meal? It was going to be a little more than $8.99 for this split pay-per-view. The idea, take me through the research you did and why you came up with what you did.
Yeah, I mean, look, we'll start with acknowledging there are financial pressures everywhere. In their unprecedented economic times right now. So that's another element of business uncertainty that going into this that really can't be denied. So yeah, unfortunately, it's not the best timing to do a pay-per-view, but there really isn't any other way for this to happen. That's what it takes to finance these kind of fights. Yes, it would have been great if there could have been some acknowledgement, here, and the price, could have been adjusted. The numbers simply didn't work, and unfortunately, we haven't seen that anywhere else. Like quarter pounders aren't cheaper now than they were pre-pandemic. UFC pay-per-views are not cheaper than they were pre-pandemic. My NFL Sunday ticket isn't cheaper than it was pre-pandemic. But we realize, there are going to be challenges. I think the other challenge is and it remains to be seen how it plays out. For boxing in particular, it's always, there's been a large portion of it that's very social. It's a group get-together, pizza and beer and, getting together at people's houses. That's probably not happening nearly as much as it does before. Now, does that mean more buys because people are buying it in their own home instead of getting together? Or maybe they're saying, hey, look, for me, the big piece of it was being in the social environment. We'll find out. But in the abstract, what we wanted to be comfortable with is, are we delivering the value for the price? It's the same price that we've been at for several years. It's the same price as, Pacquiao Broner and Wilder Fury. So we didn't adjust it, but what we did was, give, really 2 main events, which were standalone events, 5 world title fights, and far more than I think anything in sort of recent history, more than anyone has delivered in recent history on one pay-per-view. So, that's our attempt. It might be a little bit painful to pay the price, but I doubt anyone's going to walk away from that evening and not feel fulfilled and that they got a good value.
Yeah, you said the word value in this conversation. You said it in that press conference for what you're paying to get 5 title fights. And again, I'm not on Showtime's payroll. I'm just pointing out that you're getting an awful lot for what you're paying. I do wonder this. I haven't heard this asked or obviously answered by you. Was there any consideration for if I am not around on Saturday afternoon and I only want the evening portion of the pay-per-view, that you might split it and that you might make it a little more expensive, let's say 60% of the price, if I only wanted the evening and I only want to buy that? Was there any consideration for that?
Yeah, absolutely. There was. And it was one of those things, and not to, blame all our distribution partners, but it's a pretty rigid system in terms of, it's difficult to do 2 pay-per-views on one night. I know we have that. For example, I know there are multiple times when there are boxing pay-per-views and UFC pay-per-views, but UFC gone the digital route, and us, doing digital and traditional, it's not as much of a technical conflict. But having 2 different means of purchase on the same night for the same event, or at least versions of the same event, it became a nightmare pretty quickly. So we said, look, we'll put it out there, and hopefully people, look, there's some element of this where, at least in some segments of the country, that people have a little bit more disposable income than they might otherwise have. In that, we're not going out to eat as much. We're certainly not going to the movies as much. We're not doing a whole range of things. We're not going to games as much. So maybe some of that, that money gets, funneled into televised entertainment, hopefully.
Voice of Stephen Espinoza with me for just a couple more moments here. It's part of the Pig Fight Weekend podcast. And again, whether it's the audio podcast or the YouTube version of what we're doing, hopefully you find us and subscribe to us on both of those. So I haven't gotten to the specifics, but the Charlo brothers obviously are headlining on both. They've headlined before for PBC on their Fox coverage. And I know you were touting the fact these guys are basically homegrown on Showtime. So this is kind of like coming home here on the pay-per-view. And that's an important part, an important component here that I think has to be very satisfying. That's the word I'll use, very satisfying for you.
It is. We certainly look, I'm a fan of other networks being in the sport. It wouldn't be a good thing for the sport if Showtime was the only network. We need other networks supporting the sport in order for it to be healthy. So I think it's great for the Charlos to go over to Fox and be able to sort of refresh their fan base and maybe bring some new fans in. Having said that, look, they started on Showbox, and they grew to a point as world champions. They had been on nowhere other than Showtime. So yeah, I can't tell you that I didn't turn on the Fox shows, and I was a little bit envious and saying, like, this is good fights. I wish we have them back. So we pushed really hard, and we're thrilled to have them back. And they're 2 of the most entertaining and biggest personalities in the sport. And I think here in what are really career-defining fights, because the only real criticism that you sometimes hear about the Charlos is that they haven't had that big fight, that career-defining top 5 opponent. Well, they're both getting it one night. So they passed these tests. Look, it's, I think you got to start at least mentioning them, or at least considering them in the pound for pound conversation if they come in, if they do well on Saturday night.
All right, and one more time, again, it is a split pay-per-view, essentially a boxing double header pay-per-view that is upcoming. Hey, you're a nostalgic guy like I am. We're kind of contemporaries, the same age. The only thing I could really come up with as a reference point, and maybe there is something in between, I go all the way back to the early 80s when ABC over the air, you may know where I'm going with this, you may not, they had 3 world title fights in 3 different locations live in the same night, culminating with Sugar Ray Leonard fighting in Landover, Maryland. Big John Tate, Knoxville, Tennessee, got knocked out in the 15th round by Mike Weaver, and they had another light heavyweight title fight in Las Vegas. They were in 3 places, Stephen, on ABC, on network TV, in 3 different venues. Now, the difference there is they were reliant on the live gate, helping them so much to pay for the fighters and the salaries and the ABC rights fee. That's the only reference point that I have to something like this with a split pay-per-view kind of thing. So I just went in the Wayback Machine and made that. I don't know how much you were aware of that. No, you may have known all of it. I don't know.
I'd forgotten. I remembered the event. I'd forgotten that it was 3 different venues. I think the other comparison is sort of around the same time frame. Some of the pay-per-views that Don King used to do, where he was well known for having, you had guys like Terry Norris and Ricardo Lopez on undercards. I mean, and later on, guys like, Zab Judah and Diego Corrales, at times, so he was known in that period for having 3 or 4 world title fights on one card. 5, I think, I'm not going to say it's an all-time record, but 5, I think is something that I certainly, I'm stumped to come up with another situation where we've seen that before.
You're going to have that, though, on Showtime coming up on Saturday with the pay-per-view. They can check their local cable provider, satellite provider, online, etc., for how to order as all of it gets underway Saturday afternoon. Stephen Espinoza, thank you. I know you're busy. You're doing many of these. I appreciate you making time for us on the Big Fight Weekend podcast. Absolutely. And with us on the site. Thank you. Good luck with the pay-per-view. We will be watching.
Well, and the last thing I'll say, when I say this as a fight fan, not as an executive or a salesman, this is one of those, pay attention to the undercard. I mean, when you've got a guy like, for example, Luis Neri, who is maybe pound for pound one of the hardest punchers in the sport, that's a fight not to be missed. John Real Casimiro, not to be missed. Brandon Figueroa. So there's plenty there. Tune in early and sit there and pay attention.
Tune in early, stay late on the split pay-per-view. Stephen, thank you. Good luck with everything on Showtime.
Appreciate it.